Hello everyone, this is Tonelli. Welcome to a new episode of Inside the Song. I hope you all had a great summer and that you're ready to get back to work on your guitar. And today's video is all about using subdivisions creatively. Polyrhythm means pitting one rhythm against another, a different one, for contrast and interest. And we're going to do it with actual subdivisions of the notes. So we're going to have something that's strictly based on 16 notes, so 4 notes per beat. But over it, we're going to play a figure that actually makes your ear believe that it's a figure of 3 notes. So it kind of makes you sound like a triplet. And that creates pretty weird and interesting effects. And it's actually a lot simpler than it sounds. So it's a great tool to have in your toolbox. So let's get right to it. In this series of videos called Inside the Song, I teach you a musical concept or idea or a bit of music theory, some ear training, maybe a guitar technique, and always in the context of an actual song, so you can see its application in real life. And today's song is called Upside Up. It's from 2019's album Mystic Electric, and it has this kind of an out-of-character moment in the middle. It has this break because it's a very straightforward rock song, pentatonic based, very simple. But in the middle has this classical sounding break where I use this device of pitting one subdivision against another. And I think you'll find it interesting and hopefully very useful if you ever need to add variety to a composition or a bit of a surprise to a song. And so let's hear it and then we'll get into it. So hopefully it was clear how surprising it is to hear a phrase that your ear perceives as a 3-note phrase, like this one. And it wants to interpret it as a triplet. It wants to hear 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and right? It wants to hear groups of 3, whereas the actual song is based on 16 notes. 1 E and 2 E and 3 E and 4 E and And so the imposition of one over the other really creates the interest. I wrote a little score for it and I'm going to talk over it and then demonstrate each section, okay, so there won't be any trouble or any confusion. So here on the page it becomes extremely clear. The yellow lines give you the actual subdivision of each beat. We're talking about 4 16th notes and this goes throughout the whole piece. As a matter of fact, there's a little rest at the very end of measure 4, but you don't have to respect that. You can actually play an open string on the first string, it's an E. And I think that's what I did, but for some reason I put a rest in there when I wrote the score. But it doesn't really matter. Now the red lines instead give you the perceived subdivision because they're very short nuclei of 3 notes. And as you can see, even though I only painted on the first measure, you see how all the measures, except for a very few spots, follow this thing, right? Where you have a very short phrase of 3 notes imposed over a subdivision of 4 notes. A few things to notice, of course. For example, the second measure, you'll see how the series of 3 notes tend to go upwards, whereas in the first measure and the third, they tend to go down. This, of course, adds variety to the whole thing. And you'll also see the purple little things that I so competently drew. Those are spots where I interrupt the 3 notes thing. And what I do is I break it up and give you a rest, okay? Because that's another thing we'll talk about when we go through each line in detail. And at the end, you'll see a very long, uninterrupted series of 3 notes. And even though the chords change, you see the notes are different, you see I never interrupt the descending line. So let's go over one little piece at a time with a bit more detail. Okay, so measure 1, as we said, really exemplifies the whole thing. We have the little yellow thing, which gives us 4 beats on a 4/4 measure. It's all fine there. But then we have the red line, which gives us groups of 3 notes that make up the actual nucleus of the melody. And it's pretty simple stuff. I'm going to play it for you really quickly, but it goes like this. look at the highest note of each measure, because that's what your ear, especially if you're not trained as a musician, that's where your ear will fall on. You know, it will kind of, that's your reference. And you'll see how the G, which is the highest note on the first measure, occurs actually 5 times. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And the F sharp, which is the highest note of the second measure, actually occurs 6 times. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So your ear hears 4 discrete beats. You know, the pulse is actually 1, 2, 3, 4, but then it hears these high notes 5 and then 6 times. That's what creates the confusion, so to speak, but in a good way, hopefully, and makes it interesting. Measure 3 is very similar. It just goes a bit higher. You know, very basic stuff. And then the measure 4, actually, just to break things up a little bit, what I do is you see the little purple thing, which means that I'm just breaking up the triplet thing. Okay, I'm just giving you a little bit of rest, and I'm going to reset it. And so I also try not to make it too repetitive, because when you do something strange, of course, that's a great thing, right? That is interesting, but at the same time, there is a risk of making it normal again, because it becomes so obvious. And so those little rests there, you know, they're pretty interesting and useful. It sounds like this, third and fourth measure. So you can hear the final notes, they're very square. You know, basic 16 notes. Measure 5 then begins pretty much the same as measure 1, so that's pretty simple, but as soon as beat number 3 gets here, we reverse and we go to ascending, and we work our way all the way up to measure 6, where there's the other purple thing, which is also a bit strange, and it's kind of resets again, and it sets up, it's kind of like a turnaround, and it sets up measure 7 and 8, which are the strongest measures, you know, where everything kind of falls apart, hopefully in a good way, and brings you into the solo, which is actually a pentatonic solo, and that's more in line with the song, which is really basically a rock song. Okay, so measure 5 and 6 go like this. And you can see it's pretty hard to play with the fingers, even though on the score you see that it doesn't make much difference. It's all ascending 3-note groups, but it is harder to play on the guitar just because I wanted to stay in this register and with the same sound. I didn't want to go up too far on the frets. And then we get to measure 7 and 8, which this is a bit different, because you can see how if you follow along with the groups of 3 notes, you see that it never breaks. It's all downwards. So I'm going 3 notes, 3 notes, 3 notes. And then when I cross the bar line, I just go over it. I don't pay attention to it. And so the phrase becomes twice as long, and it really kind of tumbles towards resolution. And also the progression is kind of cool. It goes to a sus4 chord and then brings back to the root. And it goes like this. All right, and there you have it. This must be the most scholarly thing I've ever done, you know, with the score and the voiceover and the demonstrations, and hopefully it wasn't too square or boring, and instead made it a little clearer. And I always say that you can take this a lot further and make much better music than I am. You know, we all do the best we can, which is actually the title of another song that I'm thinking of using for this series. And just a little bit of advice, maybe you don't have to make whole sections like I did for this song. I wanted to do it with this example, but you can actually apply this to shorter phrases, and I've done it many, many times. So, you know, you can start with that. You can start with something that's very defined, like I'm going to write a little bit of, you know, 2 measures, really focusing on this, and then once it gets into your ear, then you can use it freely. This actually was pretty much improvised, this whole section. You know, you can just think of the chords and you have these very simple arpeggios over them. It's no big deal. And the other thing is, it doesn't have to be 3/4. Okay, you could, you know, the simplest thing to think about it would be the opposite. Have a triplet feel to the, you know, the actual subdivisions, and then play little phrases of 4 notes. Or you could do 5/4, you know, you can do all kinds of stuff. So definitely check it out for yourself. Investigate a little bit further, and then do what you can, and I look forward to seeing the results on your next album. All right, as always, please subscribe if you haven't done so. If you have, hit the bell, because sometimes people don't get notified. like, comment, and maybe share with your friends and spread the word a little bit so that we can make these videos reach more people. All right, thank you very much again, and I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.